Welcome to God is Open. I'm your host, Christopher Fisher. Today on God is Open, we're going to be talking about timelessness, atemporality, eternalism. Actually, just a YouTube comment on my friend Thomas's video here. His video is called The Problem with Divine Timelessness, Atemporality, or Eternalism, where he points out the fact that people who believe time is created, they can't define what time is. They can't define or conceptualize what eternity is. These things are non-concepts, and in the Bible, God does things. God acts. God creates. He moves over a series of days. God is in time. There's no such thing as outside of time. It is a non-concept. And so we got a interlocutor, someone who doesn't like this idea, and he's commenting. And this guy's name's Trevor. Let's see what Trevor says to me, first of all. I had posted, right, no one can conceptualize the idea of timelessness. Like there's no duration, there's no sequence. It's just a point object that doesn't change. God is a non-being. If timelessness is true, if there is such a thing, and God is timeless, God is not a being. God is a nothing. That what that describes is nothingness, a state of eternal, non-changing. He's no different than any other facet of the universe. In timelessness, just assuming that's something that can be conceptualized, that can possibly be true. I don't think it can possibly be true. And so I say, right, no one can conceptualize the idea of timelessness. And our buddy Trevor says, if you read and meditate upon the scriptures, you certainly can. What an odd thing to say. Oh, yeah, I remember that time where any of the biblical authors indicated any belief in timelessness. I remember that's in the Bible. That's definitely there. Thanks, Trevor, for your intellectual comment. But he wrote a huge novel, a big paragraph. He could probably publish it in book form. And we're going to kind of read through that and critique what Trevor says as his opening post. Time has been a relatively easy nut to crack. Really? That's funny, because I thought that physicists and people who understand how the world works, they fundamentally don't understand what matter is, what reality is, what time is. These are things that they cannot define. And they will show very much humility when talking about these concepts and admit the extent, the limitations of what we know. Like the actual scientists, guaranteed they will do that. We do have that video of that one scientist admitting fundamentally we don't know anything about the material world.
One of the things that struck me in all the work that I've done over the last 25 years, thinking about what modern physics is trying to tell us, is really having come to the realization that even though the great revolutions in 20th century physics fundamentally changed the way that we try to understand space and time and matter and energy, the simple truth is that we actually still don't. I've become more and more aware that even though there has been tremendous scientific progress, scientists are still asking themselves the same questions that philosophers were challenging themselves with 400 or 500 years ago. Now, that doesn't mean to say we don't make progress, but we make progress in the sense that we find ways of dealing with the ideas without ever really understanding them.
Axiomatically, how it functions, what it is, we do not understand reality. We don't have access to that information. And so he is very confident, this Trevor guy, must have been in public school. He probably was taught this in 6th grade science class. Oh, we got it all figured out. We got time figured out. We got the material world figured out. Just trust us. No, that's incorrect. Time has been a relatively easy nut to crack, Trevor writes. So maybe he'll define time for us. Once it was understood and then proven by astrophysicists that the closer to the speed of light an object travels through space, the less effect time has on it, the illusion of time as we experience it in our primitive temporal brains becomes irrefutably exposed. Okay, so what he's talking about here is time dilation. And if you do the math and you have a rocket ship and it's moving and it's emitting light beacons at 15-minute increments and then turns around and comes back to the starting spot, and then you add up all those times between, you're going to find some sort of deficiency between those two spaceships, those 2 points, and how much quote-unquote time that they've experienced. Their clocks will be different. And if there's twins, one will be older than the other. Okay, we'll admit all that. We'll accept all that. But the funny thing is that we don't see any time travel there. What we see is sequence, duration in both the objects, which could be mapped at a 1-to-1 correlation to each other, right? You're watching Star Trek and they have this little device that makes things age quick. And they shoot this tree, and the tree gets really big. We don't say, oh no, time doesn't exist anymore. Oh no. No, we understand that just happened sequentially within the same time frame that other trees were aging more slow. And this is not counterintuitive or anything. He talks about this in here where the only intuitive thing is not this. Well, guess what? I experience time dilation all the time. When I'm playing video games, it goes by instantly. Life is over just like that. It's nighttime already, just in a blink of the eye. But if you're mowing the lawn, guess what? That 30 minutes, that feels like hours upon hours. If you want to be immortal, here's the trick. Just mow the lawn. Just spend all your waking days mowing lawns. You'll live forever, and you'll experience a whole lot of time. But that is the funny thing, that we do experience time dilation in our own lives. We experience time differently based on our state of minds, based on maybe you're tired, maybe you're hyped up on caffeine. And so it's not counterintuitive that different objects experience different perceptions of duration. That is something we're familiar with. If an atomic clock in the top of the Empire State Building records less time passing than the identical atomic clock in the basement of the Empire State Building does, because the high-perched timepiece is further from the center of the Earth and travels at a slightly quicker than the one in the basement, how can this be? How can 2 times exist at once? So if I walked around my house and I grabbed two watches and they read different times, my normal reaction isn't to be like, how can this be? I don't know. I can't explain. Why this clock is different than this clock. There's no explanation. It must be that time is irrelevant. It's fungible, and there's no sequence. There's no present. There's no now. Time travel's true because I have this watch over here that's out of batteries, and now it's like frozen at like 12. I guess the world's in trouble because we're all frozen in one time. But that's not how reality works. Clocks can record different times, and that's not going to upset anyone that I know of. Maybe Trevor. Trevor will get upset that my clock's batteries died. Now my clock is stuck at 12. That will probably be earth-shattering to him. But yes, in presentism, and I'm a presentist, different clocks can read different times. It's not a mystery. These things can happen. That doesn't mean all of a sudden there's not a now. That doesn't mean that now time is a thing. That just means the 2 clocks are reading different results for whatever reason. He thinks in his mind, Trevor, that the only explanation is that time travel, timelessness, and all these things are true concepts, and time is a thing because his 2 clocks read different times. Fantastic. This is the level at which we're engaging. And he's telling us all about science, and this is his thought process. He says, makes no sense. Laugh out loud. That's so funny. Oh, ha, 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 ha. Makes no sense that 2 clocks can read different times. You can't explain it. Where's that Bill O'Reilly clip where he's talking about the moon or something? And he's like, you can't explain it. We made fun of a lot for that. But time and space, this is back to our Trevor friend. Time and space are interwoven into each other in ways that makes them ultimately inseparable and indistinguishable from each other, as energy and matter have been proven to be. Okay, that's a weird claim. You're claiming probably to know more about physics than physicists, and I don't see any evidence of these claims. This is internet, guys. So anyone could write anything and put it up there. And are we supposed to take people seriously? I don't. It's probably not a good idea in the modern world to treat people seriously unless they have shown to be serious intellectual thinkers. He's here to tell us that time is really easy to understand. He hasn't told us what time is. He hasn't answered the fundamental objections in the original video that they can't conceptualize timelessness, that they can't define time. He's responding to this, and all he's doing is talking out the sides of his mouth and not answering the questions. There's questions that have been posed. He cannot answer them. And why? Because there's no answer. What is time? It's not a thing. And so how are you going to be defining time? He does it through watches. So in his mind, if a watch has a minute, then there's something called time, and it's denominated in minutes. And that clock has accurately reflected those minutes passing by. And if a different clock reads a different time frame, that means time's fungible, and the eternity and timelessness is true. So this is the level of discourse that we are getting. Trevor. And that's without one shred of metaphysics or Christian doctrine being tossed into the conversation. If the radical materialists of empirical science can work it out, how can you pretend to call yourself a man of God, a man of wisdom, and still be out there in the cold? God transcends time because God is real and time is not. Oh, now time's not real? What? That's the presentist. That's the presentist position. So timelessness is not a thing because time is not real. True that. Did you just convert, Trevor? Huh? What did you just convert? Time is not a thing. Time doesn't exist. You can't define time. You can't, quote unquote, experience time. You can't interact with time. You can't change time. There's always a present. There's no reverse causation. There's no causes coming after the effect. The effect happens and the cause happens. We don't get any of that. Instead, what we see is presentism. Everywhere we look. My brother and I had that podcast on the theory of everything, where we talked about timelessness as a concept. We talked about presentism. We talked about the fundamental ignorance in science on the axiomatic fundamental levels of how the universe works and operates. We just don't know. And scientists, they will be honest about this. They will be humble when they're discussing the limits and to the extent of how we know and what we know. Not this guy, though. He thinks it's all figured out. So what is matter? What is time? I'm still looking for an answer there. Thomas replies, so basically what you're saying is that we live in a simulation or a version of the Matrix. And Trevor responds, and he says this: I didn't say a word about simulations or a matrix. I described some characteristics of nature, natural reality, that are counterintuitive to our experience. The fact that the speed at which an object moves through space affects the rate at which time passes for that object. Not necessarily counterintuitive. We have plenty of examples of us experiencing different lapses of time. Even, like, let's say a woman, she smokes throughout her youth. At age 30, she might look like she's age 50, right? She's aging a lot faster due to her natural environment. All of your postulations and assertions concerning time as real and consistent factor in the scheme of reality betray how and why you are currently caught in such a mindset. And you still think time is a steady constant, which it simply and irrefutably is not. I don't know what this guy's talking about. I think he's just making up positions that Thomas, I do not believe, actually holds. So he's fighting a straw man. You're doing pretty good. You're setting that straw man on fire. I think you've defeated that straw man. And I don't think Thomas would deny relativity, time dilation, even. I don't think any of that would be denied by Thomas, but just the fact that Trevor thinks that his opposition would deny these things shows us Trevor is not a thinking, rational person, right? He's not putting himself in his critic's mindset. He's not accurately understanding the other positions in order to refute them. He just assumes that whatever he thinks is bad is his opponent's beliefs, and they're terrible, and they must hold these beliefs because why? Because he doesn't like them, and those other things aren't his beliefs. So he could attack those things. He actually doesn't have anything to attack of Thomas's, so he has to invent things to attack. Then he talks about wristwatches again. He's like, okay, then we have these wristwatches, and then one of them is sent into space, and they come back, and then they're different times. Uh-oh. The watch that had just raced through space at a mind-warping high speeds would show a significant deficit in the amount of time that had passed compared to the one on your wrist. That's not a simulation. That's a fact. That's a reality, albeit a facet of reality that seems on its face to contradict what we think we know about time and its passing in the natural world, here on Earth as we live and experience it. He thinks that anything he's saying is giving any evidence to the fact that God is timeless, or any of the biblical authors thought God is timeless, or timelessness is a thing. It is a concept that it can be conceptualized. I think conceptualization is the basic one of the basic properties for something to be intelligible. If you can't conceptualize it, it's not intelligible. He is presenting us an unintelligible view, a view where God is timeless, yet God does things. There's an eternal decree, maybe, and everything is faded, and there's no movement in this eternity, but there's a movement in time, and it seems to be a perception of time. Those types of claims are pretty common when you come to Calvinists talking about timelessness. Timelessness is not a thing. Just think about it. If God is timeless, what is it? Yeah, so he doesn't exist. Non-existence is timeless, right? Being timeless, you don't have duration. You don't have an instance of yourself. There's no. What is it? It's not conceptuable. Can't conceptualize it. Despite what he says you read the Bible and they talk about timelessness. No, they talk about God being from everlasting to everlasting. They talk about God's great patience. They talk about God watching and waiting and looking and searching and all these things, that God's his anger, how his anger subsides and it flares up. They talk about his love, his outpouring of love, his acts and kindness, his elation at seeing things happen. All these are irrevocably linked to time. No one in the ancient world thought that timelessness was a thing, except for our Platonist friends. And maybe there were some other Greek philosophies floating around, but it wasn't ancient Semitic beliefs. None of them even conceptualized that timelessness could be a thing. And the ancient biblical authors, they were Semites, right? They believed these ancient Near East ideas. That's where they're coming from, not timelessness. So find a secular biblical scholar that thinks anyone in the Bible thought timelessness was a thing. I'd be surprised if you do. I would be surprised if you found a secular biblical scholar saying, like, someone like John Day. He might, if I had asked him directly if any of the biblical authors thought God was timeless, he might have laughed at me. That's what I'm projecting into my mind would have happened if I had asked biblical scholar John Day that question. Ask Mark Smith, ask any of these guys, and they'll tell you the truth. They'll tell you the scholarship. Ask physicists, is time a thing? Do we understand fundamentally what time is? Do we understand fundamentally what matter is? What the building blocks of the universe? Do we understand them? And hopefully they're going to say no, because we don't. We do not understand fundamentally what this universe is.